What is going on, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Huddle Within podcast. Thank you very much for tuning in to another episode. If you do like this episode, be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And if you can also leave a 5-star review, that would help big time for people that see sports just the way that you do to have exposure to this podcast as well. Today, what we're going to be talking about is a few underdog stories. And me personally, I love myself a good underdog story. So today, we're going to be covering 8 of probably my opinions and the subjective view of a lot of people's opinions on the best underdog stories in the history of sport as well. So a lot of different sports to cover here, but the sports that I know and love and the sports that majority of you know and love are involved in this list as well. There's a few biases here you understand when I kind of cover it, but it just gives me an opportunity to talk about a variety of different sports as well. But I think the first thing I'd love to talk about is just the meaning of an underdog. So for those that pretty much don't know what an underdog is, I think most of you would do, is the sporting team or sporting athlete or individual that is perceived as the non-favorite going into the competition, the fight, if it's a fighting competition, basically all sporting competitions or even in other competitions as well. They're not likely to be the chosen one to compete and to win in these sort of matches and tournaments, but they are rooted for the most because of the fact that they could possibly get the victory. But it would come out of sheer chance and maybe a lot of luck or rocking up on that particular day and just surprising the world. And the reason why the underdog kind of phrase came out so vividly is because people adhere to that and they love using the word underdog, but also rooting for their underdog as well. And I think kind of the reason why people love the underdog is because it sort of gives everyone a sense of hope that if you really put your work into something, you can achieve that. And in our lives, there can be times where we're seen as underdogs, going through our everyday lives, trying to kind of always compete with the person ahead of us, whether it's in our careers or it's in our local sports as well. And having that kind of underdog mentality gives you that extra motivation to really relate to these guys as well. Because if they're able to go out there, perform and compete despite the odds against them, then we can have the confidence to feel the same, or you can individually have the confidence to feel the same. Me personally, I've always loved underdogs and I've always been fascinated by a very good underdog story. So really honestly excited to cover all these underdog stories there. But for me, just looking at underdog stories are simply inspiring. You can see the hard work that goes into it, and just that surprise factor just gives you that kind of wow moment. And it also just restores what sport is. And I've mentioned this previously, that we embrace imperfections, and seeing, in a bad way, seeing teams that are supposed to win not win because a team out of nowhere have come and surprised everyone. And that's just something truly amazing to me personally. So we're going to cover the stories now. We're going to rank them down from 8 to 1. And these are my opinions. In the comments, again, feel free to interact onto the podcast, wherever you do get your podcasts, and kind of give me your sort of order. Or if there's any underdog stories that I've missed, please put them down in the comments and let me know your kind of mindset and thought behind that as well. But starting off, we're going to go with number 8. And it's going to start with AFL, Australian Rules Football. And that's going to be the Western Bulldogs winning the 2016 Grand Final. So for context, the Western Bulldogs are located in the western suburbs in Melbourne, Victoria, which technically is my local area. I go for Collingwood. I'm pointing the wrong way. I go for Collingwood. But the Bulldogs are actually the local team in my area. And they actually haven't won at the time a grand final for 62 years. The last time they won it was in 1958. They finished 7th on the ladder, and no one really gave them a chance. they managed to defeat Hawthorn in the first kind of elimination final. And off the back of that, Hawthorn won their last kind of three premierships. So that's when they started to sort of get noise when they defeated Hawthorn. But they were only sixth on the table, so Hawthorn weren't like a top four or a top two team at the time. They then got into the preliminary final. So in AFL, there's the preliminary final is basically the semi-final, but for some reason they've changed it to the preliminary final. They had the chance to verse GWS in a preliminary final, and this ultimately would have got them to the grand final. They were actually playing the GWS Giants at their away ground. So in Sydney, hostile conditions, terrible ground for those that are big AFL fans, and not many supporters there. Obviously, a lot of traveling Bulldog supporters, but in general, not a big support base there, but a terrible ground. They ended up getting the victory there by, I think, 7 points from memory. It was such a close thriller match. But that put them in place to win the grand final, to potentially be in the grand final. And they were coming up against a very strong Sydney team. Now, what I will say, although Sydney were the clear favourites to win the grand final, the Bulldogs were at a bit of an advantage when it came to going to the grand final. But the reason why I still say they are the underdogs is because they came from a seventh place position. And in AFL, it's extremely hard to get far into finals if you are seventh place, especially because the top four have a second chance if they do lose their first match. So going through that, all your games are pretty much away from home. The only time they managed to really have a home grand final, quote unquote, was the grand final because of the fact that it was hosted in Melbourne at the MCG. However, I will say the Bulldogs do play in another stadium just up the road, called Marvel now, but at the time I'm pretty sure it was Etihad Stadium. Nevertheless, they obviously had the fans. They didn't have to travel, unlike Sydney, but they were still the least favourite going in. Sydney were commanding that year. They had Buddy Franklin, who was simply unstoppable as a forward player in his sort of going towards the end of his prime, but still at his prime in that moment. And they ended up winning the match and ultimately breaking down that 62-year grand final streak, which was quite spectacular. And that was probably the first time as an AFL watcher and a Collingwood supporter that I was really gravitating towards another team. And I never gravitated towards another team than the Western Bulldogs. And I was so happy they won the grand final. I was with two of my friends that were Bulldog supporters. They were extremely happy and over the moon. It just felt very positive, and there was some really good energy in the room. And I was extremely happy for the Bulldogs fans as well, because I could imagine waiting 62 years. Imagine you were 62 or 70 or 80 years old waiting that long for a grand final and it finally happened. Is simply amazing, and it's such a very big underdog story, especially the fact that, as I mentioned, they were seventh and they also were strived 62 years of winning a grand final. So that's placed in eighth position. Only reason is because it hasn't got the worldwide coverage, but had to fit an AFL story in there because this one is probably a really, really powerful one. The next one is the Cavaliers versus Warriors finals, 2016 NBA finals. Now, the reason why this one isn't so as high as others is because the Cleveland Cavaliers did finish first in their conference. However, they were down 3-1 to a 73-win, 9-loss Golden State team, which, mind you, for everyone's reference, is the NBA record for the best ever season. So Golden State was that team. They already won one championship the year before. They had Steph Curry, who was a back-to-back MVP. They had Klay Thompson and Draymond Green all in their primes. Their team was virtually unstoppable, only losing 9 games. And they were up against a pretty strong Cavs team with LeBron James and Kyrie Irving, as well as Kevin Love. But were realistically no match for this Golden State Warriors team. And it went to a point where they were actually down 3 games to 1. For those that haven't supported NBA, sorry for NBA supporters that have, but just need to break down the context for people that don't support it. The best team, or the first team to win 4 games, ultimately wins the NBA championship. And because Golden State were ranked higher than Cleveland, I'm not going to go into a full breakdown of the rest, but basically to the finals, Golden State was seeded higher than the Cleveland Cavaliers. That meant that Golden State would have 4 home games, while the Cleveland Cavaliers would have 3. So if you do the math, 2 home games in Golden State and 2 home games in Cleveland Cavaliers. That's 4 games played. The score is 3-1. Golden State Warriors are 3-1 down. So after the 2 games in Cleveland's match, or Cleveland's home field, the 5th game was actually located in Golden State's home court. So essentially, what that meant was for everyone, and I do remember watching this in high school at lunchtime, for everyone, including myself, this was basically the coronation game for the Golden State Warriors, playing in their home floor in front of all their passionate fans, 73-9, so only losing 9 games throughout the whole season. It was pretty much a write-up for the Cleveland Cavaliers. But the power of LeBron James and Kyrie Irving came down in full force, both players dropping 40 points. I'm pretty sure it was both of them in that game, which is kind of, I think, one of the biggest playoff records in a finals. And they won game 5. Still, being 3-2 down, the Warriors still had another opportunity to close the series and win the championship on the Cavaliers floor. And they did that in the previous year when they won their first championship against Cleveland. So people were still kind of rooting for Golden State to win. They thought this was an anomaly, and they were only 1 win away still, while still having a 3-2 advantage. What happened then was that Cleveland ended up winning on their home floor, which was probably expected at the time, but people were still optimistic given the fact that surely the Cleveland Cavaliers wouldn't be able to go back-to-back in Warriors' home floor and win another game there. So going into game 7, the Warriors were seen as the massive favorites. And if you watch the 4th quarter of that, I encourage everyone to do that. Those that are not sporting fans of basketball, you must watch that 4th quarter. Essentially, the game was pretty much in the balance in game 7, and there was some just unbelievable magic moments in that game. The block on Iguodala in the stadium, in the Warriors stadium, pretty much silenced the whole crowd. That was an opportunity for Warriors to take a bit of a lead going forward. And everyone talks about that legacy block, but we can't forget the most underrated moment in possibly NBA's finals history, when Kyrie Irving had the ball with less than a minute to go in an ISO situation, hit a massive 2-pointer shot over Steph Curry to take the lead, and they won. And it was the most craziest underdog story we've ever seen in possibly NBA finals history. Now, as mentioned from the start of this, it doesn't go higher only because Cleveland Cavaliers was still a very good team. But if given the situation, going 3-1 down to the greatest regular season team of all time, the team that won the championship last year, and having the brains and the confidence to come out and take a game 5 in your away from home, take a game 6 at home, and then take another away floor game. It was massive. And what it meant to the city of Cleveland was even bigger, because the fact that LeBron James was drafted, born and raised in Akron, Ohio, which is obviously Ohio's the state of Cleveland. He came back from his super team, Miami, to try bring a championship home to his city. And the fact that he did it in this manner really cemented his legacy as one of the greatest players to ever play basketball. And whether you love him or hate him, I still think Jordan is the best, but I have to respect what LeBron has done here and what he's done in his whole career. To do that, and to also do it while you're 3-1 down on the opposition floor and producing that game-saving block, is just simply incredible. And that's stuff we live for in sports. And that was such a massive pivotal moment in basketball, and was a massive pivotal moment in LeBron James's career, and also Cleveland Cavaliers franchise history as well. So for that alone, that's why that's going to be number 7 on our underdog list. Now, going on to number 6, we're moving on to football now. So in 2004, this one is quite crazy. Unfortunately, I was only 6 years old when it happened, but going through kind of the history here, it's pretty crazy. Greece winning the 2004 Euros. For those that have a football knowledge and context, Greece have no right to win any international comp especially World Cup and especially Europe. Reason being, you have all the European powerhouses: England, France, Germany, Italy, Spain, Portugal. Those are probably the six. And if I'm missing out anyone, I'm extremely sorry. Croatia deserves a bit of credit there, but I don't think they've won a Euro, so I will put them in consideration. But those six are the powerhouses of European football. They tend to win most of the Euro trophies. They are normally the favourites. And in this moment, Greece ended up defeating Portugal in the final. And what made this more special and what people forget to realize is that the tournament was hosted in Portugal itself. So going into the final, they were obviously one not clear favorites given that they're Greece. So versing Portugal, despite where the ground is, probably the only exception would be Greece because they have the home advantage, is an advantage to Portugal given that they are the much better side. However, the fact that they played in Lisbon made it more of a reason for Portugal to win. However, Greece won the game 2-1 in Lisbon, which is simply incredible. The fact that they were able to score 2 goals against Portugal away from home and their defense being very strong, very disciplined the whole game, taking so much pressure from the Portuguese attack is just simply one of the most incredible underdog stories for the ages. And I did mention they have no right ever being in the final. They beat France and they beat Czech Republic as well, which Czech Republic was a pretty solid team back in the day too. And they beat Portugal in the final in Lisbon. And it was crazy scenes here in Melbourne. We have a massive Greek community here, and the streets went crazy, especially in that sort of eastern side of Oakley as well. So, an unbelievable story for football, showing that if you really have discipline, determination, and grit, you can overcome all odds. And that's what Greece did in this one. And it was quite simply incredible there. We then move on to number 5, and this is pretty incredible as well. It's Sri Lanka winning the 1996 Cricket World Cup. And this one is pretty crazy because no one really took them seriously. They were the co-host, but still seen as the minor ones. They beat India in India, which is one of the hardest things to do in cricket for those that don't know. Playing in India is extremely difficult. You've got the terrain, you've got all the fans that are crazy cricket fans, 100,000s of them, and managed to beat them. And then they had Australia in the final, who Australia was a masterclass there. But essentially, they won the Cricket World Cup final. And I kind of miss Sri Lanka. I remember Sri Lanka used to be a powerhouse. I'm not sure what happened to them now. But the fact that they won the Cricket World Cup back in 1996, despite being the co-host, despite India and Australia, who are massive cricket powerhouses, being involved in this World Cup tournament, is simply incredible. So big credits to Sri Lanka there. It was the start of a bit of a renaissance in there as well. They were able to get in some new players such as Jay Wardner, Sangakkara, and good old Malinga as well, who are some incredible Sri Lankan cricketers. But since then, as mentioned there, unfortunately haven't been able to reach those heights as they once did before. But best of luck. And hopefully, if they do win something, it'll be another underdog story and maybe another renaissance in the future. Just want to take a real quick second to just have a bit of a break on what we're talking about. But if you do like the episode so far, don't forget to leave a 5-star review and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. It would mean the world. We have more, obviously, stuff as well on previous episodes if you want to take a look at that as well. But without further ado, let's get back into it. All right, so number 4 is... and we're going to boxing now. It's Muhammad Ali's Rumble in the Jungle, the greatest of all time in boxing, proving it once again. At 32 years old, he came up against George Foreman, who was undefeated and just basically knocked out everyone in front of him. Everyone said that Ali was done, given that he was 32 years old and way above his prime. But he ended up knocking Foreman out in the 8th round. And it wasn't just a boxing win, it was a global moment of identity for resilience. It wasn't a team story like all these other teams, but it was possibly one of the most iconic single performance underdog stories in history. Now, we know Muhammad Ali before that was probably the greatest boxer of all time, and still is, in my opinion. But this moment really cemented his legacy, given that he was an extreme underdog, being past his prime, going up against a knockout machine in George Foreman, and still managing to get the victory. And as far as I can remember off the top of my head, I'm pretty sure the photo that everyone is accustomed to and symbolizes this fight. So another amazing story to cover as well, and something that will probably happen in the future in terms of underdogs coming in and winning fights, but this really changed the landscape of boxing and cemented a legacy in a person that was past it apparently, but showing that he still was the GOAT. So reason why it doesn't go higher is because obviously it doesn't equate to probably the next two that or the next three that I'm gonna talk about. However, the fact that it was such a singles performance and people were writing him off already still is valued of a underdog story. And there it is. That's your fourth place or my fourth place in terms of the underdog rankings here. At 3, we've got the Miracle on Ice. So the Miracle on Ice is something simply incredible. In the 1980s US men hockey team, it was pretty much made of college kids, and they faced the Soviet Union, who hadn't lost in years. They were on a roll in the Winter Olympics. The fact was that the US hockey team, being made up of young college athletes going up against professionals, and especially professionals that have been winning for so many years, made it such a big underdog story. But what made this kind of more tense was the political climate. We had the Cold War happening between Russia and US, the East versus West powers that were occurring at the time. And this was a big moment in sort of settling this political debate in form of sports, which we don't like to bring politics into our games, and we don't like to bring those tensions. But what I do like about having this kind of moment is that there is a place where you can kind of dispute this in a non-violent way, and that's through sport. So I find that pretty powerful that that's able to be done. Obviously, if the taunting and the respect is provided on both sides, it makes things a lot easier and a lot better. And that's what we hope for in a human race. But this is a lot better than a war happening, if I would say. Even though they're still doing it, I would much prefer all scores to be settled in sports, much rather than people passing away. But besides that, getting away from the political stuff, this was one of the biggest miracles ever. They ended up winning 4-3, and it was just an incredible disbelief. Like, no one expected this. The fact that they won despite having so many college athletes, despite having a Russian powerhouse or a Soviet Union powerhouse that's built up of more countries around Russia, and them being professionals, is extremely, extremely inspiring, and shows that if you work hard, if you're young, if you have that hunger, and maybe they just came out and represented the States and they really want to put the flag on their back, and the whole nation was behind them, the passion was there, the fact that the Cold War was kind of at stake in this moment, I think really gave US that extra oomph and that extra kind of resilience and determination to go out and beat a powerhouse Soviet Union side. So an incredible story, and it'll forever be named the Miracle on Ice, and for great reason as well. So we're now down to the final two, and the second greatest underdog story, in my opinion, and I never thought I'd ever talk about rugby on this podcast because I have no knowledge or any bar of it, is Japan beating South Africa in the 2015 Rugby World Cup. This one was pretty crazy. South Africa were two-time champions, physical giants, and one of the most dominant teams in rugby history. And Japan, they never had won a World Cup match in 24 years. Before actually looking at this, I actually never thought Japan had a rugby team. So it's already crazy in themselves. In terms of the betting odds, they were at 80-1 odds. So in Australia, pretty much paying $80 to win this match. But pretty much this basically unfolded in pure heart and history. Japan refused to settle down for a draw, and down by 3 in the final seconds, they had a penalty. And what they could have done was kick it to go for the tie. But instead of doing that, they actually went for the try in order to just make history and get a World Cup win, something that they were striving for in 24 years. And guess what? They got it. They ended up winning 34-32. Tears, belief, and instant respect for the team that showed pure courage. And why I've put it number two is because this is just wasn't a tip-off upset. It redefined how the world saw, I guess, rugby nations such as Japan historically. For me, it didn't really repair anything. When I saw it personally, it was just a massive surprise seeing that Japan, who I never thought was a rugby team, beat a powerhouse of South Africa. And I knew South Africa was a powerhouse because I've sort of followed a bit of the rugby nations, and I saw a bit of a movie on Mandela and rugby too. I can't even remember the name of it, but I did know that South Africa was a powerhouse and that Japan would have been pretty low in terms of rugby. So the fact that they ended up getting a victory here and how much it meant for them is pretty crazy as well. And not sure if it did much for Japanese rugby, but it's definitely something that I think the nation would be talking about worldwide. So I had to get in here as my number two ranked, given the difference in teams in terms of China, the strengths and weaknesses, just edging out the Miracle on Ice only because of the fact that America still have some pretty solid hockey players, but still, that's still a miracle. But this one is a massive miracle. But we're going to get into the greatest underdog miracle story of all time. And if you thought I'd forget about this moment, then you clearly don't know me. As a football head, as someone that loves the Premier League, I could not go past Leicester City winning the Premier League in 2015-16. And the reason why this is the number one most common and greatest underdog story is because this was probably the most consistent performance across all the other sports that I've mentioned. The Bulldogs obviously ended up going to the end and winning the grand final, but throughout the season they ended up finishing seventh. A lot of these other events and sports have come through just one-off performances versus teams. So obviously Greece in the Euros is pretty solid. However, if you set up shop, if you park the bus, you have a likelihood and a better chance of getting the victory, or at least getting towards penalty shootouts and whatnot to get a win. In tournament football, it's quite different. If you want to debate me on that, that's fine, but that's what I think. The fact that Leicester City were able to play 38 Premier League matches against both teams, home and away, with the team that they had, and win the Premier League just shows pure consistency there. Before that, they were on the verge of relegating to the second division. They just came from the second division the year before. There are teams like Manchester City who blow their budgets, Manchester United, Arsenal, Liverpool, Chelsea, Tottenham, who are all massive foundational clubs. And for those that don't know about the Premier League or football as a whole, the way that you win a Premier League or win a trophy and be successful in football is when you have cha-ching, cha-ching money. And these clubs had so much money built throughout the years. This wasn't a cup run, as mentioned. It wasn't a fluke. They won 38 games of football. And the fact that you've won 38 games of football, or not won all 38 games, they played 38 games of football, sorry, getting the passion away from me. The fact that they played 38 games of football and was able to get the most points in comparison to everyone else really shows that they were truly the best team that season. For context, they were ranked probably the worst and were the favourites to relegate along with two other teams. And their betting odds were 5,000 to 1. So if you put one single dollar on Leicester City to win the Premier League, you would have won $5,000, which was crazy. They had no stars at the time. They were built and became stars, and people realized that. And that was Riyad Mahrez, Jamie Vardy, and N'Golo Kante. But these guys were extreme misfits. N'Golo Kante, 4 years before that, was playing in low-level French division and was working as a cleaner. Yeah, there's photos of him literally picking up garbage in France. Jamie Vardy was playing non-league football, so he wasn't even a professional footballer 3 to 5 years before he came to Leicester. And Riyad Mahrez was just a random pickup signing Algerian winger who no one knew about either. And these three kind of headed the team. But the person that really got this team going was their manager, Claudio Ranieri. He was someone that believed in the squad and gave everything. And the squad just had so much belief. And the fact that they were able to just be this consistent in the greatest league in football history, and currently the greatest league in the world, is just simply incredible. And you can't fathom, like, I can't even describe to you how hard it is to win a Premier League in general when you have teams, as I mentioned there, competing for it, yet alone a team that was borderline relegating, a team that had no stars, a team that was just out of the blue randomly winning the league. And I just think, imagine being a Leicester City fan and experiencing that moment. That would have been the greatest moment of a sporting moment for a fan ever. Like, you can't actually get better than that. And that's why it's clear as day, number one. There is literally, you cannot argue with me, and I'm trying to make debates and we go through the deeper meaning. You cannot argue with me on this one being the number one. The fact that, as I mentioned, the consistency, the fact that they were able to do it over a 38 game span is simply incredible. And you know what that takes? That takes unity, that takes discipline, that takes like resilience and all those things to be able to do that. And they won the Champions League. I mean, not the Champions League. They got to the quarterfinals of the Champions League, and they also won an FA Cup a few years later. But they won the Premier League, and the Premier League is one of the hardest leagues to win, and they did it at 5,000 to 1 odds. And that is why Leicester City is the greatest underdog story of all time, coming in at number one. So I do want to reiterate my order. It is Leicester City's coming in at number one. And number two, we've got the World Cup rugby upset, Japan beating South Africa on the last play. We've got the miracle on ice, USA's college team beating the powerhouse of the Soviet Unions. We got the rumble in the jungle with Muhammad Ali getting the victory there. We've got Sri Lanka's 1996 World Cup victory over Australia. We've got Greece's 2004 Euro win away from home against Portugal. We've got the Cavaliers 3-1 comeback against the Golden State Warriors. And we top it off at the end, at the start, with Bulldogs winning the 2016 grand final. And just to kind of wrap that up, those underdog moments are simply incredible. I do expect more underdog stories in the future, and I really hope that it will be the case, because it will be great to once again cover those in the future as well. And hopefully that does happen. But you can see how big and how amazing underdog stories are, especially when the situations are so daft. And like, these are not just a team was better than another team. These were just teams that were simply miles clear and extremely expected to win better than the teams that ended up winning, and the individuals, if we count Muhammad Ali. But anyway, what do you guys think of the list? I'd love to know. Leave comments down below. If you want to reshuffle the rankings, if you'd like that, as I mentioned at the start of the episode, if you have any other underdog stories that I haven't covered, feel free to address that in the comments and discuss that with me. If you don't agree with my decisions, I'm open to understanding and debating as to why that's the case as well, if you truly like. But overall, this has been my top 8 most underdog stories in sporting history. So thank you very much for tuning in. And once again, I'm going to say it, if you did like the episode, be sure to leave a 5-star review. Also, check out episodes that I have on my podcast as well, wherever you do get your podcast, and be sure to subscribe as well, wherever you get your podcasts too. I also got YouTube as well, if you guys prefer to watch it on a bigger screen with better quality. I know Spotify doesn't have the best quality on video. You can do that on YouTube as well. So feel free to check that out too. And follow me on my social medias as well, which will be linked in the description. That way you can have a look and interact with me on some reels I do. I also have things like Emergency Huddle, where I break down the latest sporting news. I also have a bit of other content pillars that I'm looking at as well. So be sure to check those out as well. But anyway, it's been your boy Daniel from The Huddle Within. Thank you very much for tuning in, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. Cheers. So that's a wrap for this week's episode of the Huddle Within podcast. I appreciate you for tuning in and being part of this community where we go beyond the game and into what really matters. If this episode resonated with you, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who sees sports just the way that we do.
And hey, I'd love to hear from you. Connect with me on my social medias, which will be linked below. Send in your thoughts and even be part of a future episode. Until next time, keep that passion alive, stay in the huddle, and remember, it's always deeper than the game. Cheers.